Welcome back to another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we deliver raw gameplay footage and our first impressions of the latest game releases. Hey folks, it's Rash here. Honestly, I never thought this day would come. It's been like 17 years, but we finally have a new Budokai Tenkaichi. For many of us, these games defined Dragon Ball for years. Sure, Fighter Z is awesome, but it's a 2D team-based fighter. It doesn't quite capture Dragon Ball the way Budokai Tenkaichi does. That's why, even after all this time, there's still a dedicated fan base clamoring for the series to make a comeback. Nobody really expected it to happen, though. Now, sitting here and actually playing Sparking Zero is surreal. It feels like I'm back in 2007, like no time has passed at all. Visually, the game looks better, and they've made some mechanical tweaks and improvements, but at its core, this is still Tenkaichi 4. It feels like a game from a different era, and that's a good thing, though in some tiny way, it's also a bit underwhelming, but only just a little. Mostly, I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. For those of you who've never played these games before, I get it, they're really old. If they're old, then I must be ancient because they were a huge part of my childhood. I played the hell out of them. The best way to describe them is as arena fighters. You've got full 3D movement, large arenas, and the combat is more about style and spectacle. Everyone shares similar inputs and controls, but the special moves and attack variations make each character unique. What sets this game apart from other mediocre anime arena fighters is the combat. It's incredibly fast-paced, characters are teleporting, zooming through the air, deflecting, countering. It's absolute chaos when you watch, but when you're playing, it just clicks. It's designed to pull you in completely. It's one of those games that plugs straight into your brain, and sud. Everyone's teleporting all over, flying through the air, deflecting, countering. It looks like total chaos when you watch it. But when you're playing, everything just clicks. It's designed to pull you in, like it's wired directly to your brain. Suddenly, you're like Mac from Always Sunny, throwing karate moves and making swishing sounds. It really gets inside your head. Wait, that came out wrong. I just mean it's super intuitive and feels amazing. Okay, that sounded off too, but you get the idea. I'm not getting into this, I'm just moving on. Maybe I exaggerated a bit, but it won't take you too long to get the hang of it. This is one of those games that just clicks eventually. Another key thing is the number of playable characters, and Sparking Zero easily has the best roster out there. I'm serious, this might be the biggest lineup in any fighting game ever. There are over 180 fighters in the base game alone, no joke. You've got pretty much every major character from the start of Dragon Ball Z all the way to the Tournament of Power arc in Dragon Ball Super, plus a ton of minor characters. They've even included guys from Dragon Ball GT and most of the movie villains, including both versions of Broly. You've got all the classic heroes and villains, and almost all their different forms. It's a huge roster. Sure, a good chunk of them are different versions of Goku, but it's not all just repeats. There are some great additions and deep-cut characters in there too. Honestly, I can't complain about the roster size at all. What makes it even better is that you can transform and do fusion dances in battle, just like the old games. It's one of those unnecessary features that may not change the game balance, but it's so cool, who even cares? This game is more about fan service than competitive balance, but that doesn't mean it's shallow. There's actually some depth to it. There's really nothing else like it on the market. Some recent Dragon Ball games, like Xenoverse or Kakarot, have tried to mimic this style, but they're more action RPGs. The combat is simpler and nowhere near as intense as what we have here. People were worried Sparking Zero might simplify things too much to make it easier for newcomers, but it doesn't do that. There are plenty of mechanics to get a handle on, and it takes time for everything to come together. I thought I knew what I was in for, and I was still getting my butt kicked regularly. The combat system is just so different from other games, obviously not the other Tenkaichi games, but everything else. It took me a bit for the muscle memory to kick in, and I imagine it could take even longer for newcomers. That's why I mentioned it earlier. The game does start with a basic tutorial to cover the essentials, but that's not enough to dive into the rest of the game on normal difficulty. My advice is to jump into the advanced tutorials right away. If you don't, the first few hours of playing Sparking Zero could be rough. Sure, you could lower the difficulty, but the game doesn't encourage that, and you'll have good reasons not to. So, it's best to tough it out and go through the tutorials. They aren't perfect, but they give you a decent understanding of how everything works. Honestly, you'll learn more by playing, but the tutorials are still worth doing. Like I said, the game is intuitive, it gets into your head quickly, but you'll still want that primer. It's a good starting point, and that's better than nothing. You might think the main game mode, episode battles, would be a good way to learn through playing, but depending on how you process things, it's not really ideal. It throws you straight into the deep end from the start. On normal difficulty, it's tough if you're just getting started. And even though I wasn't new to these games and knew how they worked, I still got schooled by Raditz, which was pretty embarrassing. The way it works is you have 6 different character storylines that recap the events of Dragon Ball from their perspective. Sometimes, though, you get the option to do something different, which can lead you down an alternate path with different battles and potentially different rewards. A lot of these branching paths come from winning battles that, to be honest, your character is supposed to lose in the original story, and beating them can be quite a challenge. To put it mildly, lowering the difficulty won't help much either, because if you do, you won't be able to complete the secondary objectives. So, the unique gimmick of the mode ends up being locked out. It's a fun mode, but man, it can be brutal at times. There are battles where you have to face 4 opponents back-to-back on a single health bar. The nature of this game is that things can either swing wildly in your favor or go horribly wrong in an instant, so long marathon fights like these can be especially tough. The other main game mode, custom battles, is a lot more forgiving, though. Honestly, I had the most fun with this mode, playing through the goofy bonus battles they include as examples for players to create their own custom fights. The central idea is that you can craft your own dramatic battles with dialogue and special objectives. You can set up any matchups you want, as long as you can finish the fight. So, if you've ever wanted to have Bibidai take on the Ginyu Force, you can totally do that. It's a fun concept, and I like that the game has a built-in viewer so you can go online and see what other players are creating. That said, the execution feels a bit thin. The customization options are limited, there are only so many special objectives and events you can include in a single fight. And the biggest issue? You can't write your own dialogue or titles. The game just gives you a bunch of stock phrases and some keywords to plug in, which can feel awkward and sometimes downright nonsensical. Don't get me wrong, there's a certain type of person who will find this hilarious, you're listening to one right now, but it's definitely not for everyone. To be fair, a lot of the built-in scenarios already have dialogue that barely makes sense, and the whole system probably works better in Japanese. But hey, I'm not Japanese, and the people who wrote this dialogue clearly aren't native English speakers either. Personally, I love putting together dialogue that makes no sense at all, I actually think it's hilarious. But I'd also like to be able to do it properly, and that's where the game falls short. That said, the mode is still a lot of fun. I appreciate that the game gives you an excuse to use the entire roster, not just the main characters. Some of the missions are genuinely clever and help you learn how certain characters work, like one where you're Captain Ginyu and have to swap bodies with your opponent to win, or another where you play as a Cyberman and need to self-destruct to take out a much stronger team. While the creative features could use more depth, the sheer number of built-in bonus fights keeps things interesting. Like I said, it might be a little limited, but that doesn't stop it from being fun, or even great. Before diving into anything else, I've got to mention how fantastic the visuals are. They're not quite at the level of Fighter Z, which is designed to be seen from specific angles, but they're still anime accurate, and everyone looks on point. The big ultimate attacks are where the animation really shines, and the destructible stages add a ton of character, especially in the city arenas where you can smash everything in sight. I love the detail of the stadium clearing out when you use a super attack, it's a small touch, but it's awesome. The stages are more dynamic and interesting than typical fighting game arenas, with uneven terrain, water, and air battles to keep things fresh. Not everything looks as good, though. Most of the in-game dialogue is delivered by characters that look like ventriloquist dummies, blank-faced and flapping their mouths like puppets. But with a roster this big, you can't expect everything to be perfect, and even though Sparking Zero isn't the best-looking Dragon Ball game, it's still way above average. The presentation is solid, and special shout-out to the menus, they're packed with little details and funny animations. The only downside is that characters like Bulma repeat the same lines way too often, which gets annoying fast. As for other modes, we've covered episodes and custom battle, but there are also regular battle options where you can play online or offline against AI. The online mode is pretty bare bones, there's no rollback netcode, so if your opponent doesn't have a good connection, the matches can get ugly fast. I didn't spend much time online, and honestly, I don't see this game being all that fun competitively. It's intentionally unbalanced, the characters who are weak in the anime are weak here, and Goku is, of course, the strongest. So, is everyone just going to play Goku vs Goku online? I have no idea. Maybe there's something to the competitive side, but that's not for me to say. For me, the game feels more suited to casual play, so I'm glad there's an unranked mode. The split-screen mode, however, is a bit of a letdown. I'm glad they included it since it's a fighting game, but you can only play on one stage offline, the hyperbolic time chamber, which is just a boring, empty white void. I get that they probably struggled to render the more complex stages twice on the same screen, but still, it's disappointing. That's probably the worst thing about the game, but it's not enough to ruin the experience. Tournaments are another staple of the series, and they've been done well here. There are pre-made tournaments you can jump into online or offline, as well as custom ones you can create yourself. My favorite is the Yamcha Games, where the biggest chumps compete to take on everyone's favorite loser. All the major tournaments from the series are recreated, and they're a fun distraction with decent rewards for completing them. Now, about the store, don't worry, there aren't any microtransactions. Before release, I was worried the unlock system would be a grind since pre-order bonuses were things like early unlocks, but it's not a problem. The game throws any in-game currency at you for everything you do, and there are multiple ways to unlock characters. A lot of the cast is locked at the start, but you can unlock them by playing through the episodes, doing special bonus fights, or completing tournaments. Or, if you're impatient, you can just buy them with Zenny. Anything you've already unlocked will convert into extra currency, so there's no downside to buying characters early. The whole unlock system feels rewarding and a bit old school, but also more forgiving. There are a few characters you can only unlock by summoning Super Shenron, which brings back the classic Dragon Ball mechanic of gathering Dragon Balls to make a wish. But honestly, even that's not a bad grind. Compared to modern unlock systems, this is probably the best I've seen in a long time. There's also a power-up system where you can buy items to strengthen characters, which makes me hesitant to play online since the game's already unbalanced, and this could make it worse. That said, these are still first impressions, and I don't want to pretend I know how the game holds up competitively, or that I'll ever be good enough to find out. But if we're talking offline, single-player content, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is an absolute blast. Sure, there are a few minor disappointments, like the split-screen mode, but honestly, if that's the worst thing about the game, I'd say things are looking pretty good. Sparking Zero delivers on what it promises, and man, it does it well. There's really nothing else quite like it. The high-flying, over-the-top battles make it one of the most spectacular 1v1 fighters out there. No doubt about it, there's no real competition for what this game does. And honestly, I'm not sure it would even work outside of Dragon Ball. It does take some practice to really get the hang of, but once it clicks, it's incredible. If you don't immediately connect with it, give it an hour or two. It might be a little frustrating at first, but I promise it's worth sticking with. It's so much fun. This is the ultimate, smash your toys together, kind of game, and if you have any love for Dragon Ball, you're probably going to enjoy it. Seriously, it just feels so good to play, and I'm really excited that this series is back. That's just me though, how about you? Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We upload brand new videos every day, and the best way to see them first is by subscribing, of course. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, thanks so much for watching. I'm Rash and you can follow me. See you next time, right here on Noob Nation.